Guess who just bought a $3 Eee Pc laptop off of eBay? That would be me. Did I waste my time? Does it work? And was it worth buying considering the postage was more than the item itself? Let's find out, as I have no idea and they were pretty vague with the description. Let's see if it works. From past experience, buying devices sold as untested normally means that they aren't going to work, but you never know, the seller may genuinely not have had the appropriate charger to at least power the laptop on. Some effort was put into the packaging, protecting the corners, but not much else sadly. Removing the black plastic wrap reveals just how beat up the Eee Pc is. Clearly this saw a ton of use throughout its lifespan. I didn't exactly have a suitable laptop charger at first, but the battery bank for my camera slider had the correct voltage and connector. Interesting, we are getting some indication that the battery may still be functioning. And would you look at that? It turns on, but then it seems to shut off. I let it sit and charge up the battery for a bit and then it seemed to remain on for longer. Oh, it appears to have Windows 10, which is definitely not ideal for one of these low-powered netbooks, but once again it wouldn't stay on. I figured it was due to the Eee Pc requiring more amps to run properly, so I bought a very cheap multi-voltage charger, one that could go low enough for this device, 12 volts to be precise. To get the exact voltage you want was very fiddly due to how sensitive this little dial was. Once I carefully got it to sit at exactly 12 volts, I plugged the Eee Pc in and it seemed to work totally fine. And after a very long time, it loaded into Windows. It technically works, but is painfully slow, largely due to the single core Atom processor. And remarkably, the 15-ish year old battery estimates upwards of 4 hours of use. And speaking of batteries, are you after the ultimate battery bank that really does it all? Well, look no further than the Shargeek 170, made by Sharge, who are sponsoring today's video. This unique prism-shaped power bank is great for those on the go with demanding power needs. With a 24,000 mAh capacity, which is 86.4 watt hours, it's great for travel and also safe to take on an airline on your next adventure. And if that adventure takes place outdoors, well, don't worry, it's IP66 water resistant, so if you get a bit of water on it, it ain't gonna hurt it. Being able to see the charge and discharge rates on the little built-in display is honestly a great feature. With a peak output of 170 watts across the 3 USB ports and a total of 140 watts out of one of the USB-C ports, it's ready for whatever scenario you throw at it. It can also be charged up at a blazing 140 watts, which would get you from 0 to 50% charge in just about 20 minutes. This thing has great capacity, an awesome feature set, and a high wattage output that means I can charge my MacBook, cameras, AirPods, whatever, all at the same time while traveling and not have to worry about running out of power. If you want to check out one of these Shargeek 170s, they're linked in the description below if you'd like to know more, and also in the comments. Thanks to Sharge for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to that $3 Eee Pc laptop. Somehow this little netbook still works and it survived the shipping process, but oh boy is it in poor cosmetic condition. Let's see what makes this underpowered little nugget of a device work, shall we? It appears as the battery is indeed genuine and likely original, but what's not so original is what appears to be upgraded storage. In fact, this device originally came with a 160GB drive and 10GB of cloud storage. In fact, I owned one of these a long time ago. If I manage to find that video somewhere, I'll put the footage here now. Clearly, my production values have increased over the last 15 years. The previous owner put in a solid state drive in hopes to likely make it faster. I'm pretty sure I used one of these in my gaming PC I built back in 2013. The RAM has also been upgraded from the original 1GB it would have come with back 15 years ago. Getting to any of the other components requires further disassembly, but thankfully it's very easy and the iFixit guide online was helpful, if slightly wrong about a few steps, so it's definitely worth double checking the instructions and make your own mind up. Netbooks like this were insanely popular during this time period, being a great low-cost option for students needing a basic device for typing things and word processing. The first Eee Pc I ever saw was set up at a local Officeworks. The demo device had Linux and the Tux Racer game on it with the penguin that goes down the slope. It looked very interesting to me as I was obsessed with laptops throughout primary school. I have fond memories of watching Family Guy on my very own Eee Pc while on holiday, but as the years went on, the lack of performance made it pretty useless to me, and eventually I purchased a better laptop. And that's where the processing happens on this laptop. The Intel
N270 CPU is paired with basic Intel GMA integrated graphics. The metal plate behind the keyboard acts as the heatsink, basically cooling the processors passively. I mean, there is a fan, but it's just off to one side, so I don't know how effective it would have been at cooling. But it probably didn't have to be very effective since this device was so low powered to begin with. And to clean out that fan, we do need to remove the motherboard entirely. That's almost a complete disassembly just to get to the fan, not something you like to see, and I'd imagine this was built in a way to be as cost effective as possible. Being a cheap Windows laptop probably didn't leave a lot of room for luxuries. And do any of you have any fond memories of Eee Pc laptops? I'd love to read your stories in the comments below. And there's that dusty little fan just hanging out over there. I guess it got the job done in terms of cooling since this laptop still works 15 years later. Now, a good cleaning is definitely in order. Opening up the fan reveals that it has had a hard life. A lot of fine dust, but it isn't clogged up with hair like most old laptops. And after a quick brushing and a wipe off with some eucalyptus oil, it definitely looks a whole lot better. The frame itself and a lot of the internals do need a good brush off. This will have no real effect on performance, but I just like to keep my devices clean. And given just how much use this thing saw, I was expecting far worse, although there is hardly any airflow inside this device. And not all the plastic is held up all that well. Aside from some of the missing screen hinge covers, these nuts had broken off. But that's nothing a little dab of super glue can't remedy. Asus, or Asus as it's otherwise pronounced, did not waste any space on this motherboard, building the SATA connector right onto the board itself. Clearly this is done in an effort to reduce costs, and I'm not sure why the edges of this board look like this. Either way, a bit of corrosion had formed, but it was easily wiped off with some isopropyl alcohol. From left to right, we've got the CPU, graphics processor, and what I assume is the North Bridge. I also wiped down the keyboard itself as it was rather gross. Lots of gunk and debris under the keycaps. A bit of eucalyptus oil worked rather well at cleaning it off. You can see just how much came off on the cloth. I'd suggest using a toothbrush to dislodge hair and crumbs from within. And you'd be surprised how little people clean off laptops before they sell them. I can understand no effort being taken with this one though, since they set the buy now price to only $3 Australian. Oh, and I'll reuse the thermal pads on the GPU and North Bridge, but we'll be using paste on the CPU die since the old pad was damaged. I must say, even though you have to completely disassemble it to get to the cooling fan, it was all pretty easy. Everything most users would ever need access to is under the first cover you remove. And this is good because 1GB of RAM really wasn't going to get you all that far. And this is already so slow even with an SSD, so I'd imagine Windows 10 running on here with a mechanical hard disk wouldn't have been fast. And yes, it does still work, but Windows 10 is just too resource intensive, so I chose a version of Linux to put on here, but it had to be a 32-bit version, so my choices were limited. Creating an installer USB is super easy. I simply used a random USB that I had lying around. In the BIOS, I set the netbook to boot from that USB, which was thankfully detected. A cool feature with Linux is the ability to load into the operating system before installing it. However, booting off a slow USB flash drive connected through a USB 2.0 port isn't exactly speedy. Since the display is such a low resolution, it was impossible to start the installation as you couldn't scroll down and click next. I thought turning the screen 90 degrees would help, and it sure did, but it came at a cost to ergonomics. Hopefully that would be the last of my problems. And now the install appeared to be in motion, and around an hour later it was successfully done. Upon first impressions, it sure was a laptop, absolutely fine for writing up documents. Even though this is a small device, the keyboard isn't too cramped, but the trackpad is far too small honestly. Just like in Windows 10, it didn't seem to detect the Wi-Fi card. So I thought, why not try this little random TP-Link Wi-Fi dongle I had lying around. Surprisingly, it works straight away without any need to source drivers. So web browsing is now possible, albeit painfully slow due to the anemic hardware. It can almost play YouTube videos at 360p. And one of the best parts about Linux is all the free and easily accessible software. There is almost everything you could ever want, but keep in mind, not everything is going to be compatible since we are running a 32-bit version of Linux. A real old school Linux game is Tux Racer, the one with the penguin that goes down the hill. It runs great and the stereo audio from this laptop is decently loud. But on the flip side of the performance spectrum, Super Tux Kart does not run well at all. It's really Slideshow City and not playable. It was dirt cheap, and for $3, it's still a functional device with a decent battery life. It has its fair share of battle scars, but that's just character if you ask me. This was a dependable little lappy for someone, and it looks as if they got their money's worth over the years. Even though it was cheap when it came out, it had every port you would have ever wanted back in 2009. It's a little bit chunky, it's not very elegant, but it served a purpose for students and those in need of a small but functional laptop to get basic work done.
Thank you very much for watching. It's honestly really cool going back and using one of these Eee Pc laptops. I'm pretty sure I owned one from new many years ago. In fact, I'm pretty sure I even made a YouTube video about it back in 2009 or 2010. Is it worth buying one? Well, as a weird curiosity or maybe to collect, yeah, I think there's definitely still a market for them. But would I pay much money for one? Absolutely not. And the price I paid for this one, I think, was pretty fair. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.